This is Toby Capwell, curator, author, historical advisor, and all-round expert on historical arms and armor. And I'm your host, Dave Jewett. Toby and I are going to be nerding out together as we watch a selection of Warhammer animations from across the franchise, from Astartes and the Armouring of a Space Marine to 40k and even some Horus Heresy.
That's a nice detail right there. When facing an enemy that has some kind of serious ranged weapon capability, and for whatever reason yours aren't working or you don't have them, that need to close the distance as quickly as possible.
If you want even more Warhammer chat from the two of us, then be sure to check out our Patreon for a longer, deeper, extended edition of this episode. Either way, we hope you enjoy this video. Like it if you did, subscribe for more content like this, but now I will throw it over to Toby. I'm sure at this point you have seen this yourself by now.
I have seen this. It's nice to see it on a big screen. It's immediately evocative of a nightly vigil, the preparations for a knighting ceremony. I mean, I know that's not exactly what's going on here. It's about preparation, it's about transformation. When a human being transforms into a knight, there's major changes going on physically. When you put that armor on, you become something different in literal physical terms, but also mentally. Actors have been trained, using masks for thousands of years, because when you put a mask on over your face, it changes how the world sees you and it changes how you feel about yourself. Your identity somehow changes or becomes more exaggerated. So complete plate armor is like a mask for the whole body. It's a transformation, physically and mentally. So just the act of preparing for battle is a transformative act. And it's not surprising, therefore, that it attracted a lot of very strong religious association and religious kind of process. So here, this isn't a knighting ceremony. This is a Space Marine simply making his preparations for battle and getting himself hooked up to his equipment and all of the layers of religious ritual that are ladled onto that. I love this balance that they strike between this very archaic, medieval, church-like environment and the veneration of the equipment combined with high tech. There's an assault rifle as part of the knight's equipment. And I really kind of love that, because if knights had not disappeared in the 17th century, they were already adopting firearms. Contrary to what people tend to think, knights were the first ones to adopt gunpowder weapons. By the 16th century, they were carrying them on the battlefield habitually. And if they had continued past the 17th century, this combination that Warhammer makes of effectively a knight in full plate armor with very modern looking assault rifle or ranged weapons of various kinds, that would have been where it went. So it's a strange balance of being very anachronistic and archaic, but also futuristic, but very perceptive. And all of the trappings of this, the little robot cherubs, give a wonderful Renaissance flair to the whole thing somehow.
A terrifying Renaissance flair.
It's that kind of beautiful and creepy at the same time, right?
Okay, so we're going to take a look at the secret level episode, but the ending of Space Marine 2, the video game, holds some important context.
Oh, does it?
Because the secret level episode takes place, I think, just immediately after the ending of Space Marine 2. Warhammer definitely goes against the thing you've mentioned before, is if you can have any piece of armor, make it a helmet. Not having a helmet in Warhammer almost offers you more protection because it signals that you're important to the canon.
Right. Plot armor is invisible. But at the same time, in fairness, they have plenty of these characters who have terrible facial scarring for not wearing helmets. They just accept that as a risk, I guess, for being heroic. But they're very clear also when fighting demons in Warhammer. The firearms, modern weapons aren't nearly as effective as bladed weapons and more traditional approaches to the act of monster hunting. One thing I really like about the way they use their source material in this too, though, is like, it's very clear that the Ultramarines have a lot of Roman inspiration, obviously. The Thousand Sons have a lot of Egyptian and otherwise Bronze Age source material, but they know exactly how far to go with that. You know, if you made it too literally Roman, or if you put too many actual ancient Egyptian images on the gear, it wouldn't work because they are their own thing. You got to find ways of using the sources without becoming the source. And I think they've always really managed that really well. You know, which bits of Roman style are going to work with this, but they never go too far with it somehow, which is strange when you always associate Warhammer with going as far and as extreme and as you could possibly go. But then in the design, they walk a very careful tightrope sometimes.
I think the use of color helps a lot there. I don't know if you agree, but when I think of Romans, I think of red. So Ultramarines being blue, but having the Roman stylings sort of rounds out the edges of those Roman inspirations a bit and helps them blend into the Ultramarines look and feel, rather than it, you know, feeling like ancient Rome.
And they've got the unifying factor of the armor. The armor is an industrial pattern that all of the different legions use basically the same armor classes, but then it's a matter of the way they wear it and the decoration and what they're wearing the gear with. But there's an underlying continuity to it as well that really helps it maintain its own identity, even while it's pulling inspiration from everywhere. It has its own very strong visual identity at the same time.
I'm very glad that the trim for Ultramarines is now gold instead of the old yellow that it used to be. It works so much better.
And that's an old heraldic thing. That medieval heraldry works on the basis of the core colors or tinctures contrasted against metals. White, silver, and yellow gold are in heraldry considered metals, and those are always combined with one of the core tinctures, or the colors red, blue, green, etc. But you can't ever put a color on a color in heraldry. You can't just have a blue field with a red lion on it. Right. It's got to always be metal on color. And then you can put another color on top of it. So if you wanted a red lion on a blue field, you'd have to outline it in gold or silver, because then it's color, metal, color. You can't just put red lion straight onto blue. There's got to be the metal factor in there. And it's the contrast of materials and the association of those materials as well as the colors themselves. And they've translated that really nicely in the game animation, the different materials. And the main colored armor is like a ceramic skin over metal, so there's a different texture to it than the metal edges or borders.
So the secret level episode that Amazon did, that starts shortly after the events of Space Marine 2. So that ship that you board, that mission that they're talking about, it's not clear if this is the very mission they mentioned, but canonically this takes place after the events of Space Marine 2. So this is Titus as a boy, but he's wielding a Space Marine's knife.
It's just a knife, but there's a nice thing with the story of Titus as a kid there too, where they're really working on the mental aspects of what is required to be a warrior like this. And you could get caught up in all the physicality, the technology, the muscles, the fitness, the weapons training, but the kind of resolute, unshakable mentality. The rest of it doesn't matter if you haven't got your head straight.
Well, that's one of the theories with Secret Level, is that Titus's resistance to the warp is because he has such faith and willpower. And I know faith and willpower played a lot into knightly combat. They were propelled by their faith.
It's everything.
And their belief system. But it's theorized that Titus just believes so much harder than a lot of other Space Marines, and that's why he's so resistant to the warp. And there's a part of Secret Level that the Sorcerer is showing all the Space Marines their deepest fears, and they shall know no fear. So to see the fear put in front of them is really damaging to them.
Well, they have that ideal. The knowing no fear thing is an ideal. But the thing about ideals is that they're ultimately unachievable. There's something to strive for, but you can't ever really, genuinely achieve no fear. And the story arcs of most Space Marines will prove that underneath they've got the fear in there somewhere.
When it comes to Titus being shown his own fear, his deepest fear that he's suppressed because he's become a Space Marine, the Sorcerer can't do it. So Titus is able to strike back. And that's what breaks the hold that they have. It's a very interesting way to play with the element of fear, and the episode is called They Know No Fear.
I love this part because it's a little stroke of genius to put them against humans. So that gives you the sense of what it's like to have to fight them.
And they make it look effortless, almost. Space Marines fighting standard humans.
But again, that's a real knightly thing. I mean, knights are training to fight from the age of 5 years old, and when it's done with that incredible life skill level, it should look effortless.
One thing that stood out to me in just that short sequence of combat, and it's something that you pointed out to me when we started working together, is that when you're an armored individual like that and you're trained, every part of you's a weapon.
Right.
So backhands, squashing heads, headbutts, every part of him to these small humans are completely deadly.
Yeah, again, I mean, this is an exaggerated version, but the core ideas here are all, totally, in line with the knightly identity and the mentality. That he's so heavily armored and looks so strong and impenetrable, but look how quickly he moves. He can move fast. He has kind of explosive, sudden movement. They're giving us details here that prove the effectiveness of his armor. They're testing it, and he's taking cannon shells from a tank. Armor is not just a costume. They're not dressed like this because it looks cool. Ultimately, underneath all of that, there's a serious job that needs to be done. And in the portrayal of armor in a lot of film and television, they just don't get that because, the armor has come out of wardrobe. It's considered part of the costume department. Nobody ever thinks of it as functional equipment that's there for a reason. It's a big, big mistake to think about armor as costume, even though it can have elements of that. Its meaning flows out of the extraordinary physical properties that it has. I love the mentality of these particular Space Marines because in their body language and their presence, they just don't care. And none of this is a big deal for them. And they blow this whole tank up and just walk away and they don't even look at it, And it's not like it's a big Hollywood moment striding away from a big explosion. They don't care, and they don't care if you care. And it's just like, that kind of nonchalance is a very knightly quality.
It'd be unbecoming of a knight to be like, whoa, look at that cool.
No. But it's a fascinating take on the temptation and potential corruption of power too. That when you become a powerful creature like this, the power is corrupting. All power corrupts. And a knight has to wield power and yet somehow be uncorruptible. That's a unique feature of knights as opposed to any other warrior culture, is that the inextricable relationship between the warrior part of his identity and the religious part, the way in which the church is so totally involved with what knights are and what they do and what they're for, that they have this kind of ecclesiastical identity almost that wasn't always there. The Crusades in the 12th and 13th centuries had a lot to do with developing that side of knighthood. But there's something valid in that as a way of trying somehow to keep the power under control. You can't do that on your own. And those temptations and that corruption, it finds any little way in, it gets you.
Well, a lot of the symbolism of seeing these individuals corrupted and showing them their fear is corruption. The Sergeant Meteorus, his fear is seeing Titus corrupted. He was like his ward. He brought them to the Ultramarines. Right. Seeing him corrupted would be like the next generation is lost almost. But we all know Titus is uncorruptible, so it's fine. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the Warhammer cinematics, there's an even deeper extended edition of this episode over on our Patreon. By becoming a patron, you not only help support the work we do here, but you'll also be able to watch all of our previous episodes and each and every future episode 1 week early. Each patron helps support the work we're doing here at EXP, but whether you join the Patreon or watch along here on YouTube, we massively appreciate you all for watching, and now I will get back to the video.
We are raised to believe that the God Emperor watches over us all. And so we are charged to cleanse the mutant, the heretic, the alien.
So these are some of the cinematic trailers that they made for big box releases.
Meanwhile, back with the ordinary human beings.
I think the Adeptus Sororitas might have some of the most obviously historical inspired pieces of armor.
Yeah. Well, they're wearing sallets for a start. That's unmistakable 15th century helmet type. But why do you think that would be, that they would cruise a bit closer to historical shapes in the equipment for those particular characters?
I think it's because they are the sort of religious fighting force of the Imperium of Man.
Even more religious than the usual religious people.
Yeah, because a lot of them consider Space Marines to be horrible mutants and just sort of keep them arms length and just like
layers of extremism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you seen that individual before? I've got a model of him upstairs where he has a skeleton on the front of the shield. As like a living, like a reliquary. What were the boxes that they...
Yeah, reliquaries were, in medieval Christian belief, any fragment of the body of a saint, to say nothing of Jesus or the Virgin Mary, was, a holy object. And there was a huge industry in the Middle Ages of selling pieces of bone and things that were purported to have been St. James the Dismembered's little finger or... whatever. And, they're often placed in extremely elaborate cases, gold boxes and things called reliquaries. So I think a lot of Warhammer design is playing on the whole concept of reliquaries and where the belief of the person has a literal effect in how they're able to fight and oppose the forces of chaos or whatever.
Taking the fight to the enemy.
This cinematic does a good job of showing the quote-unquote lightly armored Space Marines as well. That they're really visually distinct from their heavily armored counterparts.
Well, certainly increasingly by the late Middle Ages and definitely into the Renaissance, knights had to become a lot more versatile, and they had to be trained to fight in a number of different ways, with their armor configured in at least 3 or 4 different ways. Fighting on foot, light, medium, heavy cavalry fighting, siege fighting. And there was a lot more variability in their equipment than many people realize. So it's kind of nice to see some similar contrasts here with like how different an intercessor moves and feels to a Terminator.
There's so much of Warhammer that's weirdly both subtle and on the nose. And as they started to call this new frontier of war the Crusade, Indomitus Crusade, it feels like they started to add more religious iconography and more symbolism to character design. And there is specific Crusader marks for that specific crusade. That was a thing done through history, right? If the first, second, third crusades all had their different markings that
it happened over
veterans from them.
It happens over such a long period of time. By the time of the 7th Crusade or whatever, the world the world was a different place 100 or more years later.
Oh, that shot. I feel like I need to, just for my own nerdery.
That's very evocative of some of the earliest Warhammer art in the 90s, where you have
literally behind over your shoulder of the Rogue Trader book.
Right.
It's nice that they're playing to that, because there's so many iconic pieces of Warhammer art that's a load of Space Marines on a pile of something, but it works so well.
There are many famous knightly last stands that are not unlike this, like the Crusaders going down in flames at the Battle of Hattin or something, you know.
I never wanted this. I never wanted to unleash my legions. Together we banished the ignorance of old night.
Get forward to an era that I know you're much more familiar with. The Horus Heresy cinematic. Mr. Heresy himself.
Yeah, what I love about him, though, is that he's aware of the Egyptian god Horus and the imagery of the Eye of Horus that goes back to, the ancient human civilization. They have that historical awareness, and he knows that he's kind of referring to that. And their historical perspective is quite interesting. It's a very medieval idea, too, to think of the past as a time that was more advanced than the present. And that if you want to advance yourself or better yourself or learn anything, you have to look backwards. That's a very, very medieval idea, that they're always looking back to the ancient Romans, ancient Greeks, and that progress is almost backwards. And this is exactly what the Horus Heresy introduces, that they have technology here that is not in play 10,000 years later.
Yeah, the era of 30K is more technologically advanced than 40K.
Yeah, and occasionally in 40K they have one of these ancient Volkite weapons or whatever, but they don't really understand it, and if it breaks, they can't fix it. That's a very, very medieval way of looking at kind of the timeline, that it's a backwards view rather than how we think everything is getting better all the time. We're supposed to be advancing so that the future is always more advanced than the past, but it doesn't have to be like that.
Every time we march from our beloved fortress home on the crag, we march to face down chaos and banish it.
There was a Warhammer movie.
Oh yeah?
That actually had some quite famous people in.
No
all
way.
CGI.
Really?
And it's not, I still have a soft spot for it. I've included a couple of clips from it.
Boy, this is Toby's continuing Warhammer education day. I've never heard of any of this.
But obviously Warhammer was not nearly as big then as it is now.
Right.
But they sent a Hail Mary with a movie, and it still contains a lot of iconography, symbolism, recognizable parts of Warhammer. They've done some parts of it quite well. That stained glass window is the cover art for an old Space Marines, or might be Ultramarines codex, that's just been cut apart into a mosaic for a stained glass window.
And this is way pre-Primaris too, isn't it? It's interesting to look at as a comparison to Space Marine 2. I don't mean so much to see the progression of the animation technology or whatever, but one thing I thought Space Marine 2 did really well was giving a sense of a body inside the armor, and there's a body in there operating this equipment, and just giving that sense of the dual presence of the armored body and then the organic underneath. And they nailed that with Space Marine 2. It seems like they're having real trouble with it here. Like you don't get the same kind of division between what the equipment is doing and what the body inside is doing. It's kind of blurry. The challenge with any of this stuff, though, is to capture the total weirdness of Warhammer, and especially in dealing with the warp and chaos and all of that, just how really out there and disorienting it is. If you don't get that the level of high strangeness, it quickly descends into just stock space opera stuff, doesn't it?
And in stark contrast, let us relive Astartes. You've seen Astartes before.
Yes, a while ago, but on a crappy screen. That's a nice detail right there. When facing an enemy that has some kind of serious ranged weapon capability, and for whatever reason yours aren't working or you don't have them, that need to close the distance as quickly as possible. There's a really nice sense of urgency there. You know, a lot of, I've been rereading a lot of medieval Arthurian literature recently. One thing that I've been getting out of it that I never really noticed when I was reading it in college so much is how a lot of it is about the collision between our reality, human material reality, and some kind of mystical otherworld. And knights are these creatures that kind of transition from one to the other. And when knights go out into the world and have their adventures, they're usually making a transition into this mystical other realm. And they are usually opposed to it, and they're usually trying, to suppress it in one way or another. And usually the other world is represented by female characters, and the human material realm is more masculine. And just watching this kind of reminds me again of that they're really tapping into that too. It's a lot like medieval Arthurian literature in lots of ways. You have the mystical objects like this, like, the Grail or whatever. I mean, this little story is like a knightly quest in a way. They're going through these various stages and having to deal with these different threats and challenges. It's not always so self-evidently obvious what they're supposed to do when they get there. I mean, they seem to have a plan. You can see the kind of confusion through their helmets as well. It's a nice meditation, even though there's no actors involved in this. It's a nice meditation on acting through armor and how does expression get through the armor. I think that's a lot of why this works. Interesting that the only time we actually see a human face is when he's transitioned into this other realm. And so he's changed as well now. He becomes almost like a totally different character. This last bit wouldn't work if he hadn't taken the helmet off.
Such an incredible.
It's nice to see something when the person who's making it clearly understands the underlying issues. When they've thought about what is this really about.
So Games Workshop brought the person who made Astartes on board, and now is supporting him making Astartes 2.
And he's been working away on that for a while now, huh?
And I am so very excited for it. All right, that's Warhammer.
Wow. Boy, you always feel exhausted at the end of Warhammer, don't you? God, it asks a lot of you.
Thank you all for watching. We hope you enjoyed EXP's first of no doubt many Warhammer-focused episodes. Links to more of Toby's work can be found in the description below, and as always, a huge shout out to all of our patrons for supporting EXP and helping make these videos happen. Like the video if you enjoyed, leave your thoughts in the comment section down below, and subscribe to EXP so you don't miss out on future episodes. But once more, I just wanted to say thank you all for watching, and we will see you very soon.